So I'm going to be covering the concept of organizational identity, which connects people, their roles, with their legal entity represented by their LEI, signing and submitting regulatory reports with vLEIs, 2 flavors, and then this is signing and submitting, and then signing the content with vLEIs. So the 2 different alternatives, depending on how deep you want the signatures in order to be able to represent in the submission. So we start with organizational identity. So of course you can use organizational identity inside your own institution or inside your own firm. But the important point is that by using a vLEI, you can prove the authority of a person in order to be able to represent their organization outside of their organization as well in a secure manner. And organizational identity in this way, delivered by the vLEI, represents verifiable authority. And so it's down in the math and it's down in the tech and the cryptography in effect. But what the vLEI delivers that other verifiable credentials does not is the ability that after somebody has used a vLEI, that you can use a distributed network. The issuer does not need to be online, like a CA, for example, but in real time, you would be able to verify that the credential is valid and the signature on it is valid. And so that's why what we mean when we use a vLEI by referring it to have verifiable authority. So this is a new feature that we've been able to deliver. And so this is the concept that we aimed in order to be able to deliver. There are many levels, which I'll show you in a moment, in order for us to be able to get here. But ultimately, we want to be able to issue organizational credentials to organizations that are owners or holders of LEIs and allow them to be able to use them in these credentials, ultimately role credentials. So this is a picture of a role credential. It takes the real world of associating an organization, a person, and the role that they represent or the role that they're engaging with that company in. And these can be official roles, and these can be functional roles. We started with the concept only of maybe being able to assign these credentials to officers and other official representatives of companies, but we soon came to the realization that actually the bigger use case are people in functional roles. Think of a report submitter for those of you who were in the other room listening to Radu talk about the EBA, for example. And so in the digital representation, the organization is portrayed by its LEI inside of the credential. A person identification. Right now, overwhelmingly, names are being used because one of the things that I'll go into it, there's validation involved in being able to know that you're issuing to the right person, in effect. And then the role that that person is playing within that organization or engaging with that organization. And what happens is that in a verifiable credential like this cryptographically binds the person in their role to the organization by means of cryptographically binding them to their LEI. And we do it this way. So we introduced a new kind of credential in order to be able to do this. We introduced credentials that can actually chain to one another and prove authority from one level to the other. So Glyph, as the manager of the LEI system and the source of truth for the LEI, placed itself at the top of this hierarchy. And we call ourselves the root of trust. This is a cryptographic root of trust that was put together by something called an inception event, where people actually establish the root of trust and contribute cryptographically their signatures through the use of vLEIs, so that this root of trust is actually established with more than one person acting on behalf of Glyph, and so no one can act alone. And it also forms a very, very strong foundation if anybody ever tried to want to attack this. And so now we're at level 1. Level 2, qualified vLEI issuers. Similar to what we've done with the LEI system, we're now qualifying a group of organizations that will go through a qualification program to be renewed every year to prove that they can both technically and operationally issue and revoke vLEIs and manage the keys into their operations in order to be able to keep them secure. The amount of things and the responsibilities for them are actually pages and pages long, defined in an ecosystem governance framework, which some of you are familiar with, but that's just a summary of what they do. They then contract with organizations that hold and are owners of LEIs. So they actually enter into contract with them. So there's the root of trust. When a qualified vLEI issuer qualifies, they get a QVI vLEI credential from Glyph, continuing the cryptographic chain. Then they contract with organizations, and then they start issuing vLEIs to organizations. The first one is an organizational level vLEI, containing the LEI of the organization itself. It forms as an anchor for the role credentials that we went over before in the previous slide. And now the company can decide to design the program of vLEIs that it's going to have assigned both to its officers and or to its functional people, or to give to all employees if they decide to choose as well. And so what we've done all the way through the chain is to connect the issuance of these credentials, but also to chain the revocation and the verification of these credentials. So somebody receiving a role credential from me can use the technology in a distributed manner to end verify that my credential came from my organization, was issued by a qualified vLEI issuer that is still qualified in order to be able to do so, and that the source of their power, the source of their authority, came from Glyph as the root of trust. So it not only works down, it works back up again as a chain of trust. So any questions on that before I go into signing or submitting, and then we're going to go into the examples. Okay, with this as background, I'm going to present to you the first use case. For those of you who listen to Radu speak, this is actually a very simple example of a use case of private sector reporting to the public sector. And it's the background and the demo of the POC for the European Banking Authority. So the background is that they came to us looking for a new way in order to be able to handle the authentication of the identity of many, many more banks that are going to need to report to them directly, where they were only receiving these reports from the 27 national competent authorities before. So they were looking at an very, very much an increase in the amount of reports that they were going to get and the amount of organizations that they were going to be hearing from. And they wanted a secure alternative to having to handle normal multi-factor authentication through username and password. And so they looked to the vLEI. And so in the background, before anything happens, the EBA works with the banks and says to the banks, we would like you to get vLEI role credentials. We would like you to get this kind of credential, a functional credential for one or more of your employees who are going to be authorized to submit reports to the EBA. And we want their LEI in it, we want the person's name, and we want EBA report submitter, organization, person, role. And then this is a pillar 3 POC. That person, one of those people who has those credentials, is authorized to sign that report and send it over a portal to the EBA. When it gets to the regulatory authority, which in this case was the EBA, they wanted to do 2 things. First, it checked the credential itself. They wanted to check that the credential was valid as inactive, and they also wanted to cryptographically verify the signature up the chain of trust that we just talked about. I don't know how far they want to be able to go up the chain of trust to verify, but it's available to go all the way back up to Glyph if they so choose. And then, if that check proves okay, they then didn't want, it's a strong feeling, both for mandatory and voluntary reporting, that the receiving organization wants to make sure that they're not taking in data from anybody that they weren't ready to hear from or weren't expecting to hear from. So they go inside the credential, they take the LEI of the company, compare it against a whitelist, and if that bank's LEI is on, that was in the credential is on the whitelist, they then clear the way in order to be able to accept the submission. So this is a use case that could be used over and over and over again, because we are seeing much interest, not only from the public sector, but from private repositories of data wanting to be able to use something like this in order to be able to know that the members or those who have agreed to contribute to the repository, who are following a certain amount of rules, are the ones that they're actually hearing from, and that they can verify and validate that these organizations are the ones that they wanted to hear from, and also that these individuals were authorized to submit on behalf of the organization. So this is submitting a report or a report filing package into a party using a vLEI. Okay, so next flavor, signing content with vLEIs. Paul alluded to this, and I will warn you that before we go through this, that we did our own demo of Glyph's annual report in 2021 before the signing group in XBRL was formed. It was actually one of the catalysts in order to be able to ask for such a group to be able to standardize in this area. So you will see the approach that we took for the first time, but we, of course, stand ready that, when we contributed to the requirements and now we're waiting for the specifications, and hopefully the next time we do this, we'll be able to follow the recommendations and the requirements of the signing group. So it is based on one of the accompanying technologies to the protocol that we use for the vLEIs. For those of you who want to know, it's called CSER, Composable Event Streaming Representation. And what it allows you to do is allows you to be able to sign with vLEIs many things in many ways. So specific content and specific sections or parts of a report can be signed by one or more officers, employees, or managers. The same submission, the same document, can be signed the entire contents by more than one person. And then you can go back and you can the next person can go and pick the whole report to be able to sign, or sign a new part of the report, or attest or sign again to a part of the report that's already been signed in whole or in part by somebody else. And this will actually become very clear when Phil demonstrates the annual report, where there is a hierarchy of people in order that needed to sign. But I'll go over it with you before we basically do that. So the annual report had a logic, of course. So the CFO needed to sign first. Then the head of communications signed some of the background. Our general counsel needed to sign. It then went to our CEO. It then went to our board chair. And then our auditors also participated. So to follow the chain, CFO signed the financials. The head of marketing signed some of the background information. Counsel signed the whole report. CEO signed the whole report. Board chair signed the whole report. And auditors were very happy for the first time only to have to be able to sign the financials, because they did participate in previous years where we were signing as a demo our annual report with digital certificates. And we're quick to point out that they were participating in the demo in order to be able to make a point. But they were very, very forceful in being able to say, if you ever deliver this in production, you really need to ensure that we can only sign the financials, because that's what we audit. Okay? So we found a big difference between what was available to us in using vLEIs inside of digital certificates, as opposed to be able to what was available to us in using the vLEI to sign our annual report with vLEIs. So I'm going to go back and turn it over to Phil whoops, and keep this up just for a moment. Phil is going to demonstrate this for the EBA.
Okay, great. Can everyone still hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much, Karla. So as Karla mentioned, we have successfully completed a proof of concept with the EBA to demonstrate the use of our vLEI credentials to allow someone to assert their authority within their role, within their organization, across to another organization. In addition to that, this proof of concept served another purpose, and that is to prove using an identifier that is the holder of a vLEI credential to sign XBRL CSV report packages and upload those once they have been authorized to access the portal. So this is the portal page that we delivered as part of the proof of concept, and you can divide this screen into two sections, basically. The connect button up here represents what would be the digital wallet of the holder of the vLEI credential. For the purposes of this proof of concept, I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback. For the purposes of this proof of concept, we embedded the wallet functionality inside of the web portal itself, but we envision in the future that this would be something more akin to a browser plugin, similar to the way 1Password works, integrating with other websites. The rest of this portal, the rest of this page represents the web portal itself, and it contains the functionality for uploading a report and then checking the status of previously uploaded reports. So I'll start by clicking on the connect button. This launches me into a screen that allows me to connect to my remote agent, which is the holder of my credentials. I will enter my passcode. I should mention here that the prerequisites for running this proof of concept that we established with EBA before beginning was that the bank user would already have been issued a vLEI credential, both to their organization, what we call the legal entity credential, and then also the official organizational role credential to the bank user themselves. So after connecting to my agent, I am given a list of my identifiers that I have inside of this wallet. Once I select that identifier, I'm given a list of credentials that that identifier is the holder of. And in this case, I'm presented with the EBA document submitter credential, official organizational role credential. So part of the business logic that occurs after I select and do a presentation of this credential to the EBA website or the web portal is that it is a valid vLEI credential, that the vLEI credential contains a legal entity identifier or LEI that is in their whitelist, meaning it is a bank they are expecting to receive reports from. And finally, that official organizational role credential contains the correct role. So EBA would announce, for example, that EBA document submitter is the role that someone would need in order to be able to access their portal. So once I'm now connected to the portal, you can see the rest of the functionality for this proof of concept. I can check the status of previously uploaded reports. You can see I uploaded one here earlier this morning. And in addition, I can also upload new reports. So for the purposes of the proof of concept, we created several test XBRL CSV report packages, some of which were signed, some of which were not signed. So for the first report that I'll upload this morning, I'll select one that we signed completely. I'll submit that report. And you can see that the back-end services have officially received this, and now they're performing the verification of the signatures in this. They're checking the signatures that are contained within the report against the files of the report. And then they're verifying that the person who did sign those has also successfully uploaded a vLEI credential. And the other business logic that I already mentioned, is it a valid vLEI and is the role correct? So now if I go over here, I can check the status of that report, and you can see that the new one that I uploaded is verified. If we click in, you can see that all 6 files in this report package have been signed by the submitter. For this proof of concept, we established the business logic that the submitter also has to be the signer. Of course, there's plenty of flexibility there for any future proof of concepts or production work. You could have that logic. You could have a separation of submitters from signers of the reports. For completeness sake, I'll go back and upload a report that I know has not been successfully signed. In our samples here, we also have a list of failures. And we'll just select this one with no signatures at all. I'll submit that report. And we can check the status, and you can see that this one failed because 5 of the files within this were not signed by the submitter. This report status screen represents what would be the handoff from our verification service, that is the front end of this portal, to Pillar 3 reporting, and then they would track the file from there because it has already been verified as having been successfully signed and submitted by someone who is authorized to sign and submit a report. So with that, Karla, should I move on to our annual report? Yes, I can. But before I move on, should we take questions or questions at the end? At the end, okay. So the other proof of concept we did in July of last year was signing the Glyph annual report with identifiers that were holders of a combination of official organizational role credentials as well as engagement context role credentials. We uploaded that report on our annual report page on our Glyph website, and anyone can access that here under the Glyph Annual Report 2021 if they view the report in the XBRL viewer. I have that viewer here open already, and the enhancement that we made to the inline viewer for the purposes of this proof of concept are that we added a new menu item up here called digital signatures. And when you click on that, you can see the list of identifiers that are holders of vLEI credentials that signed this report. So you can see that we have a combination of official organizational role credentials. For example, Stefan Wolf, our CEO, our board chair at the time, our general counsel. And then in addition, we have engagement context role credentials. So our head of communications, her role in signing this report was as head of communications. And then also our 2 auditors who actually at this time did not work for Glyph. They worked for an external auditing firm, yet they served in the context of the engagement of auditing our report. So they received auditor credentials and then used those to sign this report. In addition to showing who signed the report, we also had added the functionality that if you select a particular person, the embedded XBRL data fact was signed by this, or all of them that were signed by this particular identifier are now highlighted in green. So if I move forward in the viewer to look at all the other facts, you can see that those were also highlighted now because I have selected to see all facts signed by Stefan Wolf. If I turn him off, those go away. In addition, if you highlight over any fact, you can see not only the name of the fact, I think, or the type of the fact, I guess, but you can also see we've added to the tooltip that there are 6 signatures on this particular fact. And if I were to, for example, turn him off and select our head of communications, you can see that she did sign the financial facts. But if I go back to more broad global facts about this document, she signed those facts. So now as I fast forward, finally, you can see if we select multiple people who signed the same facts, we changed the color of that particular fact to more of a rainbow to represent that there are multiple selected people for that fact. And then finally, if you select fact over here in the fact properties pane, we list all of the signatures from the 6 different people who signed this. So using this technology, you can see that not only can we have multiple people signing this report, signing it in order, as Karla mentioned during her presentation, but also they can just sign a subset of facts collected ahead of time to represent the pieces of the report that they are attesting to. And so with that, I will stop sharing and pass the floor back to Karla.
Okay. I don't think that we need to put anything up unless somebody wants a question that goes back to one of the slides, but that's what we have for you. We'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you. I have a question about person identification. In Europe, of course, we have the IADAS regulation, in which if banks receive a message signed with an ADAS high attribute, they have to accept it. so they cannot reject it. So for us, we are really looking into the natural persons first, and then making the connection towards a virtual legal entity identifier. Did you already think also about that, about making connections to the IADOS regulation with this vLEI system?
Yes, we would be looking to be able to be compliant with the IDAS 2 and for the vLEI. But just to go over the concept that we went over before, when we first started thinking about the vLEI, we weren't even calling it that back then. We realized that most of the work had been done in the self-sovereign identity community, of course, that looked at your identity as a person and being able to have control over what information that you shared or did not share with people or organizations that you were engaging with. And what we sought to do was to create a hybrid. And I think that from the slide that I put up before, the person in that credential, that their role only makes sense in the context of the organization that they're engaging with or representing. So it was as Phil showed in the last demo, or that, and actually the first one as well, that the credential itself, the role credential, goes into a wallet that the company directs them to use for that credential, but it's theirs. I mean, it actually goes to the person. But because it's tied to their engagement or representation of the organization, there's an additional wrinkle. In the issuance, there's an official authorization by the company in order to have them get the credential in the first place. And also the company has the power in order to be able to take it away for both good and bad reasons. I mean, you would have to sunset an existing credential in an existing functional role if somebody moved on to something else. So revoking a credential is not always a bad thing. It just reflects the real world in effect. And then the same thing also from the exercising control. So if CEO, for example, suddenly departs, we have a mechanism for both the legal entity to authorize the revocation of the past CEO's credential, and also an interim way of being able to validate that the person who's taking the interim CEO role can be issued a credential so that business can continue while they're waiting to put a permanent person in that official role.
I wanted to ask about the roles. Is there any harmonization on the roles, or can they be anything?
There is, and that's a bit of a long story. So the you know that we love standards, especially me, and because I also act as head of standards for GLEI as well. And we did some additional work with ISO in order to be able to come up with an official list of organizational roles. Now, this has a particular scope. So what we did was we looked at jurisdictions, we looked at entity legal forms, so Inc., PLC, AG, etc., across different jurisdictions. And the ISO list actually is a list of the roles that are in the regulation or legislation or in the formation requirements for those particular entity legal forms. And so that's one part of the official organizational roles story. So by the end of this year or the beginning of next year, of course, I need to ask Phil quite when, because Phil's on the development team, we are going to update the schema in the official organizational role credential to be able to have the long name, an abbreviation. Right now it's just a string. So long name and abbreviation, transliteration from Latin from roles in non-Latin character sets, etc., those kinds of things. But the official organizational roles are a little bit more complicated than that. So our own CEO, we were formed as a Swiss not-for-profit, or the foundation itself, not GLEI Americas, was formed as a Swiss foundation. A CEO is not a role in the Swiss Business Registry for him. His role is established in the statutes. So we also expanded the governance framework for the organizational role credential so that our qualified vLEI issuers could rely on certified copies of official documents that come from the company, so they can actually see that Stefan Wolf was named CEO in our published company statutes, and therefore also issue him an official organizational role credential. The engagement context role credentials are whatever you want to put in. Whoever the issuer or the users, it can be anything from member to head of standards to report submitter to etc. And so those are agreed between and among the parties that are going to use them. And there isn't any validation by the QVI in order to be able for that. Or we've also made the software available so that the legal entity could issue its own book of engagement context role credentials or the functional credentials, especially if they want to issue to their entire employee base.
That was the same question.
Oh. Are we almost time?
Oh,
okay.
thank you. Yeah, about the auditor, that it's linked to the same legal entity identifier as the filing company. How do you do that with, I don't know, revoke when, well, an auditor's title is revoked or something? It's just like the company itself gives it the auditor title, but
yeah, we decided to do it that way from the point of the demo. But in that case, if it were a real life situation, E&Y would need to let Glyph know, and Glyph would have to revoke that credential. There are different ways in order to be able to delegate authority. E&Y could decide that they want to give all of their auditors vLEIs, and then they could attach another credential. Remember, these things chain. And so not all of them are vLEIs. They're called authentic chain data containers. And so vLEIs, the subject of them is organizational identity. But there could be another one that says, I am an auditor for Glyph. And it could chain to that person, that auditor's credential, in effect. And then E&Y could run its own program as they switch auditors from company to company.
So where do you stand with market acceptance? What's the deployment look like today?
Right now, we have about 9 QVIs in the pipeline. Most of them we're waiting for the last delivery of updated, more user-friendly software for issuance, revocation, and key management. And most of them are ready to go through their technical qualification. So they've already gone through the business and operational side of qualification. We have one use case up and running through the first QVI. And actually what they're doing is they're in the telecom industry. They are issuing vLEIs to telecom companies and to companies that want to do product or service campaigns. And they're signing the campaigns and the phone numbers that are used in those campaigns with vLEIs. And the intention is not even to let them to get through to our phones as smishing or robocalls. They're stopped on the way. So you would never see spam risk anymore. So isn't that cool?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, so that's the one we have up and running now.
I promise I'll keep it short. First of all, I love the Python library that published on the cryptography. Yeah, thanks a lot. And second of all, do you publish also the code that you use, or the algorithms that you specific code for actually signing different parts, or just only simple facts in the report?
I'll let Phil, because we developed everything open source, so I'll let Phil answer that.
Just so that we can read into it and look if we find something.
Yeah, absolutely. All of the code that we've done at Glyph that we have contributed to open source. We've contributed on 2 separate GitHub organizations. One is the Web of Trust, and the other is the Glyph IT GitHub organization. We can put together, or I can put together, a list of those specific repositories that were involved in the signing proof of concept and make them available to Karla. I guess we could publish them as part of the notes we publish for this talk.
Thank you. So we are a few minutes into the break, but please join me in thanking Phil and Karla for their presentation.